Croeso, Difda, Bernachtin, Gia Hwitch, Fulcher, Daymat. Welcome to the Celtic Myths and Legends podcast. I am your humble host, Sian Esther Powell, and I'm going to be taking you on a journey through all the myths and legends of the 6 Celtic nations. That's Wales, Cornwall, Brittany, Isle of Man, Scotland and Ireland. Welcome. Hello everyone, we are of course back to Cornwall today for the 21st episode of the Celtic Myths and Legends podcast. I wasn't so happy with the last episode, so hopefully this next new cycle will be much better. I'm feeling better already. I feel like I was in a kind of podcaster's block or podcaster's rut, if that's even a thing, and I kind of had to push myself through the other side of it. So I am ready to go with this episode. We are going to be talking about the idea of hoaxes and things like that, like modern folkloric creatures. I think this one is going to be a really, really fun episode, and I'm really, really excited about it. Today we're going to be looking at 2 Cornish folkloric creatures. Or are they? Or are they not? Who knows? I guess we'll find out. We probably won't find out. Anyway, one of them is the Owlman of Mawnan Smith. Now, I like this one in particular because it has a real urban myth type element to it, and it really kind of helps bridge the gap between the idea of kind of folkloric creatures that seem a bit more old-fashioned and ancient, and then urban myths found on like the internet and in magazines and in local news clippings and things like that, when essentially they're kind of like the same thing, right? Urban legends online, so things like the Slender Man, what have you, those are a kind of modern version of folklore. Those are internet folklore, and I think that figures like the Owlman of Mawnan Smith is kind of helping to bridge that gap in understanding, really. So, who is the Owlman? He is from Mawnan, which is a place in Cornwall. Owlman was first spotted in 1976, which is roughly 10 years after the whole Mothman sightings in America. So it kind of has a lot of parallels and a lot of similarities to the American Mothman as well. That's where it gets quite fun. So apparently the Owlman was spotted by 2 young girls who were on holiday in Mawnan in Cornwall. And apparently their tale was so frightening that their father cut short the holiday straight away and they went back home. But who should hear about this Owlman, this strange and spooky Owlman, but Tony Doc Shiels? And so the tale of the Owlman, this strange human bird type hybrid creature floating above St. Mawnan and St. Stephen's Church, found its way in a little pamphlet called Morgawr, the monster of Falmouth Bay, and we're going to be talking about that monster in a little bit. So this was circulated around Cornwall in 1976, and then Shiels finds out, he reports again, that another 2 young teenage girls have seen the Owlman again. So who knows why the Owlman is only appearing to 2 teenage girls together? Maybe the Owlman is a bit of wrong'un. Who knows? Who's to say? But anyway, Shiels once again reports another sighting of the Owlman by 2 young girls who again say that they were confronted by this big massive owl with which was the same kind of shape as a human, a strange human owl type creature. Now, one could say that the explanation is simply that it's a Eurasian eagle owl. That is quite likely going to be the source of the legend, really. But I kind of love the idea of some strange owl man lurking around a tiny, obscure Cornish village. I think it's brilliant. So ever since 1969, there have been claims here and there every now and again of sightings of the Owlman, always in the vicinity of the church of St. Mawnan and St. Stephen's Church. And it's always with this kind of loud owl-like sound, and they can often hear him around the churchyard and things like that. See, I just love this kind of urban legend type of story, really. But I pose to you the question, why does everything have to be peddled as ancient in order for it to have value? I posit that this story, as much as any of the kind of ancient stories, is just as valuable in understanding human beings and gaining a better understanding of what our beliefs are in terms of what our fears are, what our desires are, what have you. I think that folklore really can be held up as a mirror to reflect those things back at us, and that the same can be said for these types of urban legends. We don't always have to cloak folklore in this kind of mystical, ancient sense for it to be interesting or for it to be valuable cultural heritage. Sometimes these kind of urban legend type stories can be valuable in their own way. So I pose that theory or that statement to you and wonder if you agree or if you disagree. Do let me know. As it transpires, apparently churches are the favoured nesting spot for owls. Well, not the favoured, but they're certainly a place where owls often nest. So it could well be that it was just a very big Eurasian owl that was seen in Mawnan near the church. But there we go. Like I said, it's kind of fun to imagine it being this strange owl man. So what I meant by this is when it gets interesting is thus. Doc Shiels wasn't only the kind of investigator, if you will, behind the Owlman, but also Morgawr. So according to certain historians, they have suggested that the Owlman was in fact a hoax by Tony Doc Shiels. And that is because apparently the only witnesses to the Owlman were either friends of his or family of his, or he was the only one that had interviewed people, supposedly. None of these people had thought to interview anywhere else or tell their stories anywhere else. So when these stories were kind of circulating in the pamphlet Morgawr, the Monster of Falmouth Bay by Anthony Mornan Peller, which should tell you something, that name, because Peller is actually a Cornish cunning man. So much like the cunning woman type of trope, the Peller is the kind of masculine version of the cunning woman or the cunning person, but specifically in Cornish folklore and folk custom. So there you have it. Anthony Mornan Peller circulated these pamphlets, and it might well have just been Tony Doc Shiels, really. So apparently he did have a bit of a reputation for hoaxing as well, which I think is kind of brilliant, to be honest. I love the idea of just of creating these hoaxes in a way, because like I said, I don't really see why everything has to be ancient. There can be some kind of value in these stories, even being 30, 40, 50 years old. And in fact, many of the stories that we do think are ancient bits of precious cultural heritage are actually really not all that old at all. Hello everyone. Now this is going to be exciting and strange actually, because that first bit of the episode I recorded 7-8 months ago. I recorded it basically as soon as I posted the previous episode, which was quite a while ago now. And I was really buzzing, and I don't know what stopped me from continuing it. I've got a very bad problem. If something goes wrong, my brain just sort of accepts defeat and just goes, no, that's it. When it comes to this podcast anyway, and, you know, I live in a very small house with my parents still, and nothing is ever going to be perfect. Nothing is ever going to be quiet in this household. I've got a very noisy old computer. My parents are talking downstairs and you can hear everything and all of this. And it's never going to be perfect. And I need to sort of, let that go. Hello. It's been a while, probably not for you. Some of you have been listening to my episodes again, or you're listening for the first time. So this doesn't feel like a thing to you. This, you're probably already familiar with my voice. I've been flooding your ears for however long you've been listening. Well, it's certainly a change for me because my life has changed quite a lot in the last 7-8 months, and I'm sure people aren't really interested in this, and we will get back to the folklore in a moment. But my life has changed quite a lot. I am now exhibitions and engagement officer in my museum, which means I'm in charge of the exhibition schedule and, activities, workshops, summer holiday stuff. Basically, it's a lot of jobs smushed into one. But it's great. It's fantastic. It's in my hometown, and I'm very, very lucky. And, it's full time. And I just don't have the time that I used to dedicate to this podcast. But I want to try and carve time and, literally carve time out of my free time to continue with this podcast because I love it. I love this podcast. It's something very special that I still get regular emails from people, regular Facebook messages, regular comments on TikTok, because in case you didn't know, I have a very silly TikTok called Celtic_Shan, which is it's all over the place. I'm sometimes a little bit embarrassed about it. I can't believe people watch my content on there. But yeah, things have changed quite a lot. But I love this podcast. I feel very proud of it, and I feel very protective of it. But it's something that I do completely alone. I do everything. So it's not, hugely professional sounding. I would love for it to be professional sounding, but I think I've given up on that now. I have I have a dedicated full-time job, and this is just something that I'm going to have to make time for in the scraps of free time that I get. But, thank you for anyone that has continued to listen to my podcast, that has continued to stay in contact with me, that has kept, watching my TikToks and keeping up with what I'm doing on Twitter and that kind of thing. It really does mean the world to me. Anyway, let's get back to folklore. Now, interestingly, as part of my job, so it was sort of relevant that as part of my job, talking to a local artist that's going to be possibly creating, should I say, some clay piskies around my museum site, which will be really, really cool, which is a new creation, inventing folklore. I love this idea of inventing creatures. Why does something have to be, ancient, and why does it have to be, real? Why can't something just be made up and still be fun, still be important? Because the thing about the Owlman and Morgawr, the sea serpent of Falmouth, is that whatever the origins of these stories, however they came about, since they were brought into general awareness, people have come forward with their own stories. Other people have come forward with sightings of the Owlman, basically Cornwall's equivalent of the American Mothman. People have come out with their own stories of Morgawr, the sea serpent. These stories have captured people's imaginations and people have just gone for it. So whether or not you can trace any one of these stories, you can definitively trace the origin to a hoax. I really don't think that it actually matters. Folklore is about storytelling. People are captured by stories, and as I've said before, folklore reflects back a lot of things about what it is to be human. And I think it's a really, really great, underrated historical tool in that way about understanding people. So I love the Owlman, I love Morgawr, and I would be very interested to know what your thoughts are on, urban legends, things like that. And we cannot talk about Cornish urban legends without talking about the Beast of Bodmin Moor, surely. So the Beast of Bodmin Moor has essentially only been in general kind of awareness since the late 70s. But when you think of Cornwall now and Cornish folklore, the Beast of Bodmin Moor is surely one of the first things that you're likely to think of. Now, this idea of alien black wild cats is not, unique to Cornwall. All across the UK, there have been stories of like phantom cats. And in the same way that there's, loads and loads of stories about black dogs, and I have covered that in a previous episode, so I'm not going to repeat myself too much. But yeah, black dogs, wild cats, these stories of, gigantic creatures roaming solitarily on the moors. They're not isolated incidents, but Beast of Bodmin Moor is certainly a very iconic one. Now, there's lots of different theories for this. Scientists have suggested that no, there can't be a population of gigantic wild cats on Bodmin Moor. There's just not enough livestock to be able to, sustain them. But there are also theories that there perhaps were an actual real thing that, literally just a panther or something that escaped from a private collection and made its way around Bodmin Moor. Like, it could have been an actual large cat that escaped or was released out of a private collection and then, became the Beast of Bodmin Moor that it is today. And it's another great story of just, it doesn't quite matter what the origins of the story is. What matters is what comes afterwards. How are we inspired by these stories? What do they mean to us? What is our relationship to them? If you know what I mean. Do you know what I mean? Let me know if you know what I mean. But I love these stories, and I think sometimes people take folklore and they take storytelling a little bit too seriously. I'm not going to tell you what relationship you should have to the stories that you grew up with, or the stories that you learned about, or the stories that you found that you connected with. I'm not going to tell you how you should, digest those. But I do think that sometimes we take storytelling and we take folklore a little bit too seriously. Things have to be real, and we have to prove that they are real, and we have to find the origins of them. And I just think, why does it matter sometimes? I don't think that it does. I think what's interesting is what happens afterwards. What happens to the story afterwards? How does it evolve? How does it change? And I'm going to use some internet examples as well when we're talking about urban legends and modern folklore. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Slender Man. And of course, with folklore like that, and I do call it folklore, but with things like Slender Man, you can trace that to an origin on the internet. It's digitally, traceable. You can find the beginning of it online somewhere. I'm not going to do the research into that. You could do a whole thesis on whether or not internet urban legends are modern day folklore. And I don't have the time, and I don't have the funding to do that. But you can digitally trace the origin of it. But that doesn't matter. What matters is how people have reacted to it afterwards. There was that horrible, awful story of those young girls who, violently attacked another young girl, was it? I might be getting the story wrong because I don't really like true crime very much, I have to admit. I know I'm a podcaster and I don't like true crime. I'm very sorry to any true crime podcasters who might listen to my show. Maybe I'm a wimp, I don't know. But there was that horrible, horrible story of those young girls who violently attacked someone in Slender Man's name. Like, they did it for Slender Man. They were so, taken by this story, taken by this creature, that they did that. Now, this is what I mean. Like, storytelling has such a profound effect on people, making up stories, creatures, events, what have you. It's what comes afterwards that's the most fascinating thing for me. It doesn't matter where a story comes from, really. I mean, academically, it's interesting to try to trace the origins of stories, especially ones like The Mermaid of Zennor, which I know I've done episodes on before, but it's that chicken and egg type thing. What came first? The medieval bench carving in St. Sonora's Church in Zennor, or the mermaid myth? What came first? Like, that's academically interesting and I do love it. But really, at the end of the day, a lot of these stories and like urban legends type folklore. It doesn't really matter where they began. To me, anyway, this is all my personal opinion, and you are more than welcome to disagree with me. In fact, it would be great to get your thoughts on this. So, let me know on Twitter or, wherever else you can find me. I get around a bit on the internet. But yeah, I don't think it really matters where the origin of these stories are from. What matters is, how we react to them, how we read them. So Owlman, Morgawr, Beast of Bodmin Moor, they've captured people. They have captured people. People have had their own sightings. Now, whether or not this is some sort of hysteria, some craze that we all get swept up in, I don't know. But there have been subsequent sightings after the initial sightings. Whether or not those initial sightings are fake, they're hoaxes, it doesn't matter, because afterwards there were subsequent sightings of all of these creatures. Those other people, decades later, will continue to have sightings of the Morgawr, of the Owlman sometimes, of the Beast of Bodmin Moor. So people have their own stories to tell for whatever reason. And this was just a little episode to, just to kind of validate the urban legends, really, and bring up the topic of conversation of whether or not urban legends or stories that are only, a few decades old, whether or not these are just as important as stories that are 100, 200, 300, 1,000 years old. Please let me know your thoughts. I would love to know what people think. I don't think that I have much else to say other than that I'm really sorry that it's taken me so long to upload this, and I'm going to just stop promising you that I'm going to upload regularly, because the truth is that I don't know. I love this podcast. I feel very proud of it. But I don't know when I'm going to upload episodes, I'm in a very small, cramped room, in a very small, loud house, and I just, I'll record them when I feel like I can. But there. I've actually been told many times that people love when Bailey interrupts an episode. There was that episode before when the door kept creaking because Bailey kept throwing himself at the door and opening it. So I think it adds to the charm. I think people like it. Thank you so much for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Celtic Myths Pod or at Sian Esther. You can email me at celticmythspodcast@outlook.com. You can find me on Facebook at Celtic Myths and Legends Podcast, and you can find me silly little things on TikTok at Celtic_Sian. Whilst, a lot of my content on TikTok is a little bit silly, I would say specifically look up the hashtag folklore in 60 seconds, which I'm quite proud of, and those are all 1 minute videos on various folkloric creatures. So if it's just the folklore that you're interested in, and I wouldn't blame you if it is, then check out Folklore in 60 Seconds on my TikTok as well. Yes, thank you. The next episode, of course, will be Wales, and I already know what I'm going to do. Of course, I could just keep doing the Mabinogi, to be honest with you. I could just keep doing episode after episode on the Mabinogi and it wouldn't get old. And I absolutely love it. And I will eventually cover the whole Mabinogi, by the way. I know I've done branch 2. I know I've done branch 4. But no, next Welsh episode, I'm going to be talking about Welsh fairies. All of the different types of Welsh fairy type creatures. So I think it's going to be really, really fun, and I'm really, really excited about it. So like I said, I can't promise you when it's going to be. Can't promise you when I'm going to upload it, but hopefully sooner than it took for me to upload this one. But who knows? I do love the Wales episodes, though, I have to admit. I love doing them all, but I do love the Wales episodes. Thanks again for listening. Thank you for your patience. Stay safe, stay well, look after yourself, and speak to you next time.